and something you don't see so much as now, but when I first started, I say in the late 80s and the early 90s, there were a number, particularly a number of female students coming in who were incredibly timid. The idea of being assertive or going out was completely foreign. And sometimes that was our biggest triumph at the end of a class, was having somebody put their arms out and being strong. And in fact, one of them, and I think, and I don't know if you know Maggie, but she was also one that took her the whole term to learn. And she is a very powerful sensei now. But and some people who pick things up very quickly and they're ready to test, and others of us who everybody finds their time and when they hit their challenges. Hers were early, but then she grew, and different ones, some people find it very difficult to roll, even learning to roll safely. I had two students who saved themselves being hit, riding their bicycles, and who managed to do a roll over the top of the car and stand up on the other side. Learning to be assertive without being aggressive, that was a huge lesson.
Yeah.
Learning when not to use things. I have a student who, one of my former students, he had come from karate, I think. And he always talked about being the tough guy. And he went to, he was Abbotsford, going to the pub, and we were strong and stuff. And he suddenly realized, he said, he didn't need to fight. He felt the stronger thing to do was to walk away or to not engage. And it was a huge thing. So, Aikido is not just
right?
that. So it's, it's the other path, aggression begets aggression. So, but to be assertive is really important, and to not be a target. I mean, it's, if you're looking for again, that came up last week about if you're looking for your 8-week self-defense course, it's not really, there's lots of other things you could do which would be more effective on a short term to learn in a hurry. But the sense of the state of mind and the mental power, I think that's huge in Aikido. It's not that physical one. And that's something that you don't lose even as you get old enough and we can't do stuff. But as you say, we're coming onto that idea of what kind of classes people need. And if you want something that's more physical, I'm even noticing things now. I've been very fortunate that I've had very few injuries, and I can still, do, I have still got a certain amount of stuff that I can teach and be fairly dynamic in. But there's things I don't do now that I did even 10 or 15 years ago, or you suddenly realize that you haven't been demonstrating these things. And if you're always teaching a beginner class, getting that aerobic sense. And so it's needing that other sense. And so right now I have another guy, my assistant this last year, he has a background in a number of martial arts, and he's Japanese, and he has a sense of that both that fun side and being Genki, and your grandma isn't Genki that way, whether even if you're still fairly flexible, you don't, it's not the same. So we have a period in every class.
It doesn't necessarily translate to the whole body.
Yes, I think I'm the same on the inside. It's just the packaging's a bit worn. If you are, one of the challenges of established dojos is that we are hierarchical, and we have this tradition of, looking up to the people ahead of us. But at the same time, in any organization, if you aren't constantly renewing, you come to a point where the people who are coming in, if they don't feel empowered themselves, and if they don't feel like they have a sense of being able to run certain things, it will be very difficult to keep them. We did for years. I mean, we've had varying kinds of classes that we started at, since I'm still a member at Victoria Aikikai. We first started the Wednesday night class. We didn't have one, so I would teach at UVic, then run up to the main dojo and do a class there. We started the bad back class. We had a women's class for a while. We started the Sunday morning class so that people from different dojos could get together. you constantly have to keep adding and changing as the
Right.
needs of your community go. Changing the kids class. I started teaching kids before I went up to UVic. And I remember that was one of the last things that I was doing when I was pregnant with my older daughter. And, and because I remember telling the kids, I said, if I can do these roles, you can, and I was 6 months pregnant, but it's it's those kinds of things. I think it's the sense of letting go sometimes of something, because ownership does become burdensome, but sometimes if you've had it for so long, it's difficult to let go, because somebody will do it differently from you, and you have a sense of how it should be done. And I don't think that that's always a good thing. Even if you go and have somebody for another year and come back and do something, you've got to keep doing that, even not only in the teaching, but in the leadership roles, the other roles, like the executive of your club. I think it's really important to have different people taking things on. When we were a club, one thing we did do was we'd have to elect our president, vice, and social and treasurer, and there was always a shadow person every year, so that with the understanding that the next year that person would be there to take over. And so there was always a sense that somebody did the job and somebody shadowed the job,
Right.
and they were there to step in the next year when they were
Yeah.
coming. We have also, in times when we had more students that that you couldn't just look and see. I can see now with only 10 to 15 students, who's there or not. And if somebody needs, so I would reach out. But when we had more students, but you suddenly found people weren't coming, we always had to think, if somebody hadn't been there for a couple of weeks, that was part of the deal, was to check up and see where had they been injured, which was on the. Sometimes people get injured and you don't know.
Right.
Unless you go and find out, why aren't they coming to class? Was it because they're injured, or was it because they were worried about being injured? Or is it just school stuff? And then, so all of those things I think were important in keeping the group going.
For sure, the follow up, and even if the response is something negative, well, that can be, a point of learning for yourself then as well, like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
what's happened with this person? What can I do to make sure that a similar
Oh, we've had
situation
lots of
doesn't
those.
happen again, right?
It happens. Sometimes they were directed at me, and sometimes it's somebody else in the club. But and they're equally valid to that. To every person's experience is valid to them, and I think it's important to recognize that. I know that when I first started and when we were out here, Victoria Aikikai is fairly is traditional and fairly formal in our practice, but I've never found it that way, just because I started and I was part of it more or less from the beginnings here.
Right.
But it took having some of my new students go, and then they went as visitors to say they found it, and so I didn't notice it, but they would have found it that much more, even though I found it welcoming. And the teachers were great, but because it's different or something, that their perceptions are there, but you need to realize how it's being perceived by other people. I think that's one of the problems, is we don't always realize it. When you're comfortable in a situation, you don't realize that not everybody coming in the door it feels the same.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And that's important too, to be able to sort of, to see that and feelings of discomfort in others.
But because they did do surveys at the university, always sent certain things out. One of the times when we were in the middle of one of our, there was a good, 15, 20, active ranked students. And, and somebody was there, but then they said, yes, but it's a terribly cliquey place. And I didn't see, well, I didn't go to all of those things. I did some, but the other junior instructor would, but it was more like there was a whole bunch of them because they had a common activity. They all worked at the same place and they did stuff. And so somebody new coming in didn't necessarily feel that they were, and
It can be hard for them then to feel like they can't break into that little clique or whatever. Yeah.
Which happens everywhere. I'm the 5-year-old granddaughter's just having her first experience of that, with who's in and who's not and who can play with whom.
Yeah.
And it doesn't change over life. We just do it in different ways.
Just sort of backtracking a little bit to that issue of discomfort and stuff. I find that, you know, there's a very high need for trust when you're doing Aikido, you know, because
Mhm.
you're not necessarily practicing with someone who you know very well, and yet you're expected to trust that they're not going to, you know, break your neck or whatever. So, you know, having a dojo that feels open and comfortable, where people who are experiencing a little discomfort feel that they can speak up. I think that's important and something that we should try to cultivate for sure.
I think one of the things that we always do in our beginner sessions, and every term, no matter where we are, we always start from the beginning, and then we, depending on who's there, we progress more, was respect and trust. That you have to respect yourself and your partner. And as you say, you have to trust yourself and your partner. So we say that from the very beginning, that you're giving yourself as an uke, you're giving yourself as a present, you know, that you're offering yourself to somebody else, and you are trusting that they will take that gift and use it
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
And you are also trusting in your own abilities and everything else, and you respect your partner. And so that's, as you say, lessons outside. I mean, they're super important about daily living, about having that sense. And the other thing about feeling accepted, not so much now, but in the earlier days, there are still far more males in Aikido than women. For the long time, I went to lots of classes and was the only girl there. But since I had already just finished 5 years in engineering, where I was the only girl,
Mm.
I didn't really notice, because it sort of was not something that really, I walk into a room, I wouldn't even see it. For
Right.
other people, it would be a much bigger issue. I mean, I grew up with boys and was always much more comfortable there. That issue, we also had, my sister-in-law started Aikido in Toronto, and her girls were there. And at the time, that particular dojo, there were quite a few people, and the men who were Iranian. And it wasn't that they were mean or horrible, but culturally, for them to practice with a woman and to hit someone, or to, you know, even approach them, was very uncomfortable for them, which of course in return made it uncomfortable for my sister-in-law and for my niece, because that was just the norms for them to be able to practice together.
Yeah.
And it took a long time to change that kind of thing, because you come from a different sense, and who would practice with whom.
Mhm.
So that was one of the things that we find, that we say from the very beginning, that the responsibility, you are ultimately responsible for yourself. So that anytime that you go to practice, if you are in a situation and you are not comfortable, you have every right just to say that I need to sit down. And then you can approach your instructor and just say, whichever way it is, whether it's because it's too much, you're being stimulated too much, or just because you're not comfortable with the techniques, that doesn't really matter. Ultimately, it's your responsibility to say that I can train, or I'm not able to, and you can just sit quietly and watch, or find somebody else. And instructors, I think, and one of the things we do all the time is, that's one of the big things we're always looking out for, is just seeing who can practice with whom, and who might be a problem. And so we often would use our other senior instructors to go and quietly educate some of the slightly more rambunctious students, or whatever way they would need
Right.
help in. Sometimes it's just unconscious. I mean, as you know, at times you will have people saying they're being too rough, and somebody said, yes, but you're rough. And I, you know, I didn't think I was, but he said, yes, you can be pretty tough. And I was like, oh, well, anyway. Or how much you allow your student. If you, and tapping out, you know, not everybody almost respects that immediately, and say, well, you need to learn to take it. Well, you know, you don't. And if you're an instructor and you have a relationship with your student, you can very gently encourage them to extend their limits, but that's not something anybody else has the right to do. And those kinds of things, I think, were very important, because we did find that we had people who left because of that kind of thing. We found that out after the fact when we went checking.
Yeah.
We even find when we have the doors open and people are walking by, we've had people come in and watch and then join the next class. We had 2 people just recently when we opened up. So that in terms of recruiting, it's having that first week and allowing people to come and even try out the class. We do a number of demo classes. We've done it in the schools. Every year we've done stuff for ESL students who come to the university and stuff, and they've asked us to come, and we've had very good response from that. They, it's amazing what you can do in an hour-long class in terms of an introduction. We do a short demo. We always start with a demo class where we'd have a class going on, and then we'd have individual students, from people who've been practicing for 2 or 3 months to people from 10 years or more. And they would each get up and show this is what you could do at the end of your first term. And here are some of our senior students. We do find the big thing in terms of once you've recruited students in the door, it's just having that everybody talks, that everybody is approachable. It seems to make the big difference. We used to in the old days, of course, you had handouts and everybody talked about all the stuff in the history and everything else. Now everything's online. So just even having that, and for people coming in and showing those kinds of videos and talking. We spend a lot of time just talking about, as you say, the Aikido on and off the mats, that Aikido it is a physical exercise, and it's much more. And it's something that can sustain you, that it's something that you can practice as a young child. You can practice, as a vigorous youth and young adult. I practiced, it helped me through my pregnancies when I practiced and trained as a young mom, and now as a senior, keeping me from becoming decrepit. It's the same. One of the things that's good about Aikido is that the very same movement that you can practice and be as an aerobic exercise can be practiced as a form of Tai Chi in that sense. And that connection between mind, body, and spirit, I think, is the essence of everything that we do in Aikido. And it's one of the things that we do spend a fair bit of time just on that meditation coming into class, because the number of times I come straight from work, come roaring into the dojo, and my head is full of everything, and then you start and you get halfway through the warm-up, and it's like everything is out of your mind, and you have that focus.
That's what
it's
I
a
call
huge
it, hitting the reset button, and
it is.
Whatever's been going on in your day before class, or whatever you have to do after class, doesn't matter. It's just
You're in the moment.
You're in the moment.
And I think it's important to tell your students that you have, because even now after 40 odd years, particularly you get into the winter and you've got there, and all of a sudden you think, I don't want to go out tonight. Why, but you never regret having gone to class. You have to push yourself to go there. And if nothing else, I said, one advantage of being one of the teachers is that you kind of have to go because you have to show up, and then you have a reason to be there. And you have to go, so you have to find something but it's true that you have that sense of that's what gives you that commitment to go. And some of those, I have students now who they don't practice, then they come back, but then they always find their way back in. Even the ones that I've got a bunch of 3 or 4 now who have young children, and sometimes but we can be flexible because we had a big gym. So, and her husband gets off later, so she brings her 3 and 6-year-olds, and they come with her, and we put out a few mats for them in the corner. They do gymnastics until they get picked up, and she has a way to train. For many years, my husband always had to do stuff on weekends. So if I wanted to train on Saturdays, I had to take my kids. And there was a kids class before ours. And so 2 of the older kids, in fact, it was like Mark Chin and Cyril. And then there's probably about 8 or 10 of them. They ran around S.J. Willis High School while the rest of us practiced. And that was our we did that for 3 or 4 years, being adaptable to those kinds of things. Circumstances change, and then the demographic changed. So
Yeah.
we had that. We had somebody came, both of them, they met through our club and married, and they had a little guy, and but they used to bring him to class if they wanted to train. And so sometimes I would have him in my arm while I was demonstrating, and then we had a little side piece for him, and then he started crawling. So we found goalie nets, and he was in a cage, and then he got bigger, so they came and trained that way together. So I think
That's
those
really nice.
kinds of things, you know, and having that flexibility to allow them to do that.
Yeah, and it also kind of then it also sort of supports that feeling of the dojo being kind of an extended family too, where you're helping each other to get your training in, given whatever life
And
stage you
yeah,
happen to be in, right? That there's that support and that.
and
Mhm.
I think it's important to have young people teaching beginners classes. And for a while we hadn't had that, and I think it's because you need people that you can connect with too on that. I mean, I had wonderful older teachers as well, but that's for different parts of my practice. But you'll still need somebody who's just fresh out of something, and I think that's really where we need to take anybody who's just, and as you become that, I think it's important for our Udansha to teach, in the sense that, as you say, it's in teaching that you become aware of your own practice.
Yeah.
And I even found that, for the longest time, when with Carhart Sensei, as wonderful as he was, but he did all the testing, including fifth cues, fourth cues. I mean, and it was a wonderful thing. But then all of a sudden he was testing some Udansha, and he called a senior Udansha up, and he said, okay. And he wanted our critique of the class. And of course, and when you aren't doing that all the time, you tend to abdicate that responsibility of having a critical look at your own students.
Hmm.
So that's part of our teaching that we even do now with as our junior students are testing. When they go up, they have to go up and demonstrate in front of the class, and then the next more senior student has to critique what they've demonstrated and stuff, and to help what they need to do. So I think, because then you have that sense of, when you first come to teach it, you suddenly realize, oh, do I know what I'm doing? And I think it's a really important thing. And I think they quite enjoy it after they're scared to death when they first do it. And then they quite enjoy that sense of what they have to do.
Hmm.
So I think we all feel that sense of accomplishment when you can take something and pass it on.
Yeah, it's that polishing of yourself, right? You theoretically what should be happening, but when you have to explain it to someone else, that's a whole level, another level of understanding. And by
And I think
forcing yourself to do
Aikido,
that, you end
mm,
up becoming better yourself, right?
Aikido Aikido is one of our former senior students, George Curry, always said Aikido is about correcting your own mind and improving yourself. It's not about the other guy, because quite often our temptation, well, I can't do it because my uke is lousy or whatever. They're not moving. But everything we do, even in our own practice, is as an uke, you put yourself in the best position to allow your partner to do the technique.
Mhm.
And as nage, that whole thing is about that taking that gift and moving well. And so it's not about showing how hard you can throw someone. The power comes out, but and somebody said, well, how can you get better if you're always with someone who's not as good? But somebody was saying he was practicing with his son and playing tennis, and for years and years he practiced, and his son, as he got better and better. But you don't realize that it's raising the level of everybody around you. It's
Mm.
not like you don't win by beating somebody else. You improve by improving everyone, which is kind of a neat thing, that you don't win at the expense of somebody else in Aikido, which is one of the things that drew me to Aikido, was that philosophy of, it's about raising the standard, about even for everything that you do. But no matter what, it always it comes back, you know. At times we suddenly feel, oh, we've missed the boat, we haven't got any practicing right now, but it hasn't gone anywhere. It's just sort
No,
of resting.
no, and you know, that's really what I found by, you know, talking to different people and stuff, is that it hasn't gone anywhere and it's still all here within us. And, you know, if anything, I like to think of it as like just kind of, you know, prior to COVID, a lot of the thing that I was really interested in about Aikido that really attracted me to it is just that connection, and how does that connection change from moment to moment with your partner. So like by taking that away, then it's kind of given me an opportunity to sort of focus on all the sort of more internal aspects about, you know, because it's not just harmony with your partner, it's also harmony within yourself too, right? Mind, body, breath, and all of that. So yeah, I kind of see it as maybe we can use it as an opportunity to grow in that area, maybe a little bit, hopefully.
Well, have you noticed that sometimes we use our partners for balance and various things, and all of a sudden you're doing individual practice, and you're not leaning on anybody except
Yeah,
yourself. And so when you
yeah,
fall over, it's amazing how often you realize, oh, I felt I was terribly balanced, and I'm not. But there you are. So,
yeah.
and I think more and more, particularly after this year of COVID, people just want to connect, and you know, and not just over a Zoom. So they want to be able to touch somebody and hug somebody and to feel part of a group. You know.
Yeah, I think so too. I think, yeah, everybody's just going to be so grateful to be able to grab onto somebody. You know, it's going to feel.
I know. I know. Anyway, I better go and let you go. And
That was really great.
it will go on, with or without us.
I know, I know.